Thank you, Jacob. And good afternoon, Council. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the first of our budget workshops. Just a bit of housekeeping up front. This meeting is scheduled to go from 4 until no later than 6 p.m. If we go that long, we'll actually stop at about 5:45 in order for everyone to take a short break before jumping into the council briefing, which will go from 6 o'clock to no later than 6:45, at which point we'll take another break before we start the council meeting at 7 p.m. So for this first meeting that we have, we won't go longer than an hour and 45 minutes. And if we need to tack on time to another workshop that we have, we will do so accordingly. You should also have received notice that we will be doing our two meetings for the tentative budget adoption. Those will be September 3rd at 6 p.m. and September 14th at 6 p.m. accordingly. So you should all have that information on your calendars as well. So with that being said, we're going to dive right into this. This is the follow-up to the budget showcase that we did virtually last Friday, where now we start going through each of the departments in a little bit more detail for the council's perspective. And obviously, if you have any questions as we go along the way, we're more than happy to answer those for you. For tonight, we'll be going through three particular sections of the proposed budget. We're going to be talking about the executive and legislative section, the finance department, and the human resources department. And you'll see that both finance department and HR representatives are on the meeting with us tonight. So the first thing I'd like to do is point you to the executive and legislative section of the budget. And you'll notice that there are some changes between last year's format and this year's format with regards to how it's structured. And we'll just go through page by page, so it's a little bit easier to follow. On page 1, you'll notice that there is a section under organization which shows the personnel count, the authorized positions for executive and legislative. You'll notice that over the past 2 years, that numbers has increased from 21 to 25. You'll see that that is associated with the city attorney becoming in-house with a legal assistant. Also, information systems, while had been previously located within the finance department, it's now part of our particular departmental budget. And the fire marshal is also shown as having one additional position for 2021, which we've made a conscious decision not to fill at this time until we know what the fiscal environment looks like, but that would be a deputy fire marshal position. As we go on to page 2 and page 3, you'll see the continuation of the long-term city goals and organizational initiatives. One of the things I'd like to point out within there, most of what's in the city manager performance measures stays consistent from last year to this year. However, on page 3, you'll notice at the top under the organization, one of the things we're looking to do is add one holiday for President's Day. That in particular is to bring us on par with all of the surrounding governmental communities. If you remember the chart that was handed out to you last year, we were actually 2 holidays behind every other governmental entity in Northeast Florida. Last year we added one holiday. This year we're adding a second. That will put us on par, and we do not anticipate any further adjustments in paid holidays going forward. You'll also see the last bullet in that particular box is negotiating with FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. We will be starting that up here in the month of August. We have our first meeting set for August 17th going forward. The other thing under community, you'll see on the first bullet, no reduced levels of service to individual programs or divisions. This was relatively important to us from a fiscal perspective. As we mentioned in the budget showcase last Friday, we had thoughts of enhancing levels of service prior to the COVID-19 impact, and our focus shift to making sure that we maintained the same level of service going forward and not actually having to reduce any. We believe this budget actually promotes that going forward. On page 4.
Hey, Mike.
Yes?
Can I ask a question about page 3?
Absolutely.
Under the community section, would it be possible to add something about communications? Because I feel like that's an area that we still need to be working on. that, like, I know Jacob is getting started on the newsletter, but I think that, communications with the public and engaging the public in what's going on with the city is just an area that I really would like to see us continue to focus on that. So could we add that as a goal or a performance measure?
I think I'd look for a consensus from the council as to whether or not they wanted that added, to make sure that I'm not doing it just for one council member, but a majority of the council to make that a focus area. This is perhaps something that we can make a note of it. AJ, if you can please make a note on that particular item. And one of the things we may need to do is bring back a little bit later a listing of those items that were proposed by council and see if there's a consensus to move forward on any of them individually.
Are you asking for a consensus?
Well, we do not have all 7 council members on the on this particular call, so this is something that I think we'd probably wait until we had a majority, either at a regular council meeting or at a council briefing, to see if there was a more formal direction to us at that time.
I think we do have 5.
You do have 5.
Yeah, Charlie and Chris and Corey are on. I don't know if they want to weigh in at this time or not.
And we can either do this as we go, or we can wait till we get to the end of each section and review what the comments were and see what the consensus of council is at that point. That might be a little bit easier to go through each section and then lock in each section as we move forward. We've got a note for that.
All right, and so are we asking questions as we go page by page, or we're waiting to the end of every section?
I think you can ask questions as we go, but if you're going to make a suggestion for an actual change in the budget document, we should probably hold off until the end of each section to see if there's a consensus to make that change.
Okay, then I had a comment on under city on page 2, you have performance measures, but you don't have goals. I know it says goal initiative, but it's not clearly delineated like it is under the other ones, with the exception of the city attorney, who also doesn't have any goals.
Yeah, and if you take a look, most of the goals are actually supporting the other departments in their individual goals, which fulfill the higher level goals, so to speak. So for instance, lengthen the life of city assets, support O&M budgets to maintain city assets, and supporting departmental efforts to replace end-of-life assets. That's pretty much within the Beaches Energy and the other utility divisions within the city. And as those items are brought forth, we're making sure to approve those that need to be replaced and make sure that the department is actually looking at it from a programmatic perspective for life cycle analysis, as opposed to just waiting until it breaks, so to speak.
I guess my concern ends up being some of these are measurable, others they're very difficult to measure as written. So looking at it from at least an HR perspective, if we're using this to assess your performance for the year, some of these are hard to, they're just hard to measure as written. Others are pretty straightforward. So I don't know if in the future we want to think about rephrasing the city manager's goals so that they are measurable. So when we look at your evaluation, we can measure how well you've accomplished it from one year, accomplished your goals from one year to the next.
And that's something that should probably definitely be the full council weighing in on, if it's going to be used from a performance evaluation perspective for the city manager, to make sure that all of you are on board with what the goal is and what the appropriate measurement is going to be, as opposed to me just taking a stab at it, I guess is the right way to say it.
Yeah, I guess just because it says performance measures, I figured this is what we're using to measure your performance, and it's very vague to be able to do so.
Understood.
Thank you.
Was that in on pages 2 and 3? Okay, that brings us to page 4. You'll notice on page 4 and page 5 of the document, we now have 2 insert sections. One is for the city attorney's office with some goals within that element as well. City Attorney Ambrosio, I don't know if you wanted to speak at all to the goals that are posted.
I sure can, and I'll be glad to answer questions. But I did not, actually, I wasn't asked to prepare any performance measures with respect to this document, but for Councilwoman Dumont, I certainly can prepare performance measures, but I didn't know if, again, to follow what you said, Mike, I don't know if I should be the one drafting performance measures for myself. But I'd be glad to do any of that. But this was just a brief set of goals that are just overall large goals. I can't remember when we did this. It feels like this was pre-COVID, but I'd be glad to answer any questions with respect to those or elaborate on them more.
And if there's no questions for the city attorney, you'll also see that information systems is now identified in page 5 as opposed to being within the finance department. Given the fact that they report to administration now, most of their goals are pretty straightforward in terms of trying to keep us at the cutting edge with a limited staff that we have within that particular department.
Mike, can we go back to page 3? We skipped the clerk's office.
On page 4.
Oh, sorry. Yes, page 4. I had a question about assemble and distribute council agenda packets 4 days prior to the meeting. I don't think that that's a lot of time, especially if we're looking at 4 days, 4 weekdays instead of 4 business days, because if we get this on a Wednesday, we work that week, and by the time we get a chance to really dig into it, there's nobody in City Hall to ask questions to until Monday, which is the day of the meeting. So I don't know if we want to clarify how much time council should have with these documents prior to the meeting. And I understand 4 days is what it has traditionally been. And I know we've had this conversation in the past, possibly extending the time that council as well as citizens have with the information to do some research and actually be able to make substantive comments at the meeting.
We'll flag that as another item for the end of the section and see if there's a consensus to increase the time from 4 days to something else proposed by council.
And are you ready for page 5?
Ready for page 5.
So, you know, if I had more time with this, I had a good amount of time with this document. I'm just questioning at why the average response time for support requests is the target is 1.5 hours when 36 minutes and then 12 minutes. So that target just seems way off. It's just a number. The target should be something that you strive for, that you are like, you have to work towards. And 1.5 hours sounds like you can go to lunch and then come back and maybe get to it and still make that average response time.
I know that we have our IT manager, Kent Haynes, on the line. Kent, I'm going to presume that 1.5 hours has been consistent for a number of years. And just because that's the target doesn't mean that it's not the same target that we used in 19 or 20. Is that correct?
That is correct. That target is a holdover. We recently, last year, changed our ticketing system, and that changed how that time is actually measured. And that accounts for the decrease between actual of 2019 and so far in 2020. We're more effective at getting to the tickets and getting them annotated with at least an initial response. My supposition is that in next year's business plan, that number is going to go way down at the most an hour, maybe even as low as 45 minutes.
And is there a reason why we can't do it in this one?
We can do it in this one if that's what's desired. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. Bring it down. We are doing much better. Like it shows here right now in 2020, we're at an average of 12 minutes, which I think is fairly quick. So no, I don't have a problem bringing it down to this one.
Mike, we can update the book before we publish the adopted budget in November.
Sounds good.
And then one final thing, and I'll try and be quiet for a little while. I'm running out of my little tabs. And this is not for IT, this is for the budget book as a whole while we're talking about possible adoptions. For us sitting here in now August, we're looking at March's numbers. And we got this in July. Is there a way that, and that's 5 months into the year, so we are not really understanding what we are currently looking at with the accomplishment of our measure in our current fiscal year, when we're looking at what we did in the previous one and what we're trying to project for the next one. So if there is a way that when in the upcoming year, or even for this one, be helpful to make sound decisions, if we could have that updated from March until like at least June, it just, we're looking at 5 months of the year, another 5 months have passed, and we don't have that data in that 5 month span. And I know this is how it's always been, but I think it could be updated for more, for better decisions.
I'll have to get with Ashley and AJ on that. I know that there are certain windows that they need to look at with regards to locking in the budget with certain numbers. And otherwise, you know, they'd constantly be going back in and changing everything. We'll see what we can do in order to try and push that out. But we'll have to discuss what the impact is to the overall process of budget preparation.
Great, and it really is just as the measure. So I'm not looking at the
Correct.
finances, I'm looking at the measure of success in the goals. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other questions on page 4 and 5, we'll move on to page 6. You'll notice that there's now the fire marshal's office being inserted within the section of the budget. The fire marshal has 2 primary responsibilities. They both lie within public safety and also with emergency management for the city. As referenced earlier, there is a deputy fire marshal position that has been frozen until we know what the financial status of the city looks like. That will affect to a minor extent the ability to go in and update some of our emergency management plans. But Steve is focusing his efforts where they need to be, which is on the immediate life safety needs of the community, performing inspections and plans review for construction and reconstruction activities.
Hey, Mike,
Yes.
where do the vacation rentals fit into the performance measures? Which, is it under one of these that's listed here?
That would likely be the non-high hazard occupancies, but keep in mind the short-term rentals are done once up front for compliance. So that's the equivalent of basically going out and looking at a multifamily residential or another type of habitable structure where he performs it prior to certificate of occupancy. He basically does it as it's needed. On page 7, you'll see the pie chart that shows the breakdown of funding sources for the city. You'll notice that there are now line items for the city attorney, information systems, and fire marshal, all located within this particular budget. On page 8, you'll see that there is the city council budget. We are maintaining the $3,000 in funding assistance for Dial-A-Ride. You'll then also see the breakdown of personnel associated with the city attorney's office, and on page 9, information systems and the fire marshal's office.
Question real quick on the city attorney expenses for 2020. We budgeted 330,000. Where were we in 2019 with outside counsel and full legal expense?
I'm not sure if Ashley, if you're on the line, I'm not sure if you still have access to the matrix that we had put together a year and a half ago. If we don't have that handy, Councilor Vogelsang, we'll have to look that up and get it to you.
That would be appreciative. I just want to look and see if we're estimating. Obviously, it's a great decision, and even if it costs more money to have Chris, I just want to know kind of where we are and what we thought versus what we're actually spending in the transition from in-house to outside counsel.
Hey, Mike, I have some figures for 19 if you want to answer this now.
If you'd like to read them off, go ahead. I know that originally we had put together, I think it was a 5-year history of legal expenses for council before the decision to go out and recruit an internal city attorney. But if you've got 19s, by all means.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember Vogelsang, on outside counsel alone in 19, I'm showing we spent just over $433,000 in FY19. When we built the FY20 budget, we tried to keep it kind of flat, onboarding Chris and then reducing the budget for outside counsel. So we tried to keep the budget a little bit flat from 19 to 20, knowing full well that 2020 and 2021, once we got through them, would more accurately capture what it's costing us to bring this in-house.
Right.
So you'll see the budget grew a little from 20 to 2021 because it also reflects the addition of a legal assistant position, which
I
occurred.
saw that, and we had talked about that in our discussion, even in bringing him in, that was probably going to happen. I didn't remember the number, and since it wasn't in here, I was just curious.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions on page 8 or 9? Hearing none, we'll move on to pages 10 and 11. On page 10, the one change that we made between last year's budget and this year's budget is that we did a roll-up of the operating costs as opposed to breaking that out into individual line items. Still roughly the same items are included within it. It's just shown as a roll-up as opposed to a full breakout. On page 11, you'll see that there is the half-cent sales surtax fund, the Better Jacks Beach. You'll see that we have over $800,000 worth of expenditures between streets, sidewalks, and bank service charges. And just as a reminder, as we go on to the next couple of pages, that is a funding source that is looking to go away in 2030 with the expiration of that countywide tax. On page 12 are the financial summaries, along with percent changes shown for executive and legislative, the non-departmental divisions, governmental debt service funds, and capital project funds. And then on page 13, we start talking about budget issues, of which some were addressed last Friday at the council showcase. There's a couple that I'd like to point out to council. The first bullet on page 13, as we referenced on Friday, and again for the people who might be watching today, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a pretty big hit at the state level with regards to tax and fee revenues that are collected by the state of Florida and are ultimately distributed to local jurisdictions, including cities and counties. We're not sure how long and how deep that reduction in revenues is going to be to the city of Jacks Beach. We presented some numbers to you last week that the month of May saw about a $700 million reduction in revenues to the state of Florida. Obviously, if numbers like that continue for any prolonged period of time, it will be a pretty big financial hit to the city going forward. Also, the last bullet on page 13 is where we talk about the replacement of our business enterprise software systems. This is also referred to as the ERP. Based on the approval from council at a previous council meeting, we are having an outside audit performed of the progress on that project to date. We still have $830,000 that have not yet been expended with Tyler, who is the producer of that software. We want to make sure we're going in the right direction before we spend more money on that particular item. On page 14, you'll notice on bullet number 2, that's the reference to the half-cent local discretionary sales surtax. Again, that's a little over $1 million a year that in a 10-year window will cease coming into the city. It seems like a far distance away to get there, but 10 years is going to go by very quickly, and then that money will no longer be a revenue. And then the last bullet, just to put out there as a reminder, we are still wrapping up the vision for the community, which will hopefully funnel down into a strategic plan. It is unknown what the financial impact of that strategic plan will be. The goal of the strategic plan is to be just that, strategic in decision-making going forward. Some of the decisions may be to allow lag time where certain projects are done as part of larger projects. And the council in other instances may give direction that they want other projects done sooner rather than later and in specific portions of the city. We won't know what that financial impact looks like until we actually whittle it down to the identification of individual projects. And then the very last page is just a capital outlay detail, which is a summary of everything that you've seen within that particular section of the budget. With that being said, that wraps up the legislative and executive portion of the budget prep. Are there any overall questions on this section?
Mike, I had a question on page 12. I just didn't have a breaking.
Yes.
Can you just explain the dip and then the return with the service operating under executive and legislative department? 2020, it was 722, and 2021, we're budgeting 955. In 2019, it was 930. I was just wondering why it dropped down and now it's going back up again.
AJ, would you like to handle that one?
I have to look a little bit into that to be able to explain the dip from 19 to 20, but the increase from 20 to 21 really is attributable to what you're seeing going on in the city attorney's office. And then remember, since we're also merging some other departments that used to stand on their own, particularly fire, you know, now that fire is not really its own standalone department and we've transitioned the fire marshal into the executive branch here. That's kind of what's driving that. I can get you a little bit more narrative on the fluctuation you're seeing from 19 to 20. I just need to dive into that a little bit more to get you a better answer.
Okay, that would be great. And then the transfers, we're budgeting a rather large increase for the transfers, non-departmental transfers. So just wondering if I could have a little background on that.
Sure, Mike, do you want to take this one or you want me to?
AJ, I'll let you do it if you want to give the breakdown of where that money was placed.
Absolutely. So Councilmember Dumont, what you're seeing with the transfers is largely attributable to what's going on in the non-departmental division. We had 850,000 budgeted in transfers in 20. And then for 2021, we realized that we needed to dial in a little bit more. And so one of the things you're actually seeing, if you go to page 10 on the executive business plan, it kind of gives you a break. A couple items I wanted to walk the council through this really is, one, we've established a new police vehicle reserve. That was an expense that used to be paid for directly out of the police department's general fund. And so just like any other general fund activity, what happens is, you know, you spend what you can within the scope of the fiscal year, and then whatever doesn't get spent will lapse. We haven't really run into an issue with police and their vehicles on that, but we felt strategically from a long-term planning perspective, it was appropriate to establish a reserve in the general capital projects fund. It allows for better long-term planning and it makes the funding more consistent. You're able to kind of stabilize it over the course of several years. And then
can I just ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Question about that? Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm guessing that in our police budget, we already budget every year. I guess they last for about 5 years, the cars. So every year you're putting away a fifth of a car, the cost of a car. And I take it that's already in the police budget. So this is going to be in addition to that, kind of like as a backup?
No, ma'am. This is replacing what was in the police budget.
So we've moved it out of the police budget and put it into, okay.
Yep. So we took it directly out of the police budget and it's now a transfer out from the general fund into this newly established reserve.
Okay, thank you.
And then the other addition that you will notice for 2021 is the addition of a city sidewalk maintenance and construction reserve. And that got $225,000 for 2021. And then you'll notice some of the other various reserves that we contribute to also fluctuated a bit from 20 to 2021. So building security improvements went up from 75,000 to 150 in 2021. Our parks maintenance reserve doubled from 20 to 2021. You know, a lot of this was decided upon, you know, trying to be more forward thinking about a lot of the things that are going to be coming down the pike. You know, makes better sense to save before a storm hits.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and we're at the end of this section. Mike, on page 14, this is just as an aside, when we're looking at the city parks and facilities, I believe I discussed this with you a year or so ago. We should look into having adult changing tables, at least in 1 or 2 of those locations for parents that, you know, their children are adult children, and right now they have to change their kids in the back of their cars and such. And there should be some kind of an adult changing table in the public restrooms at the public facilities for those situations. I've had some requests for those. I don't know how you want to work that in, but I just don't want that to fall off the table again. No pun intended.
I've made a note. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I believe that at the end of this section now, there were 2 items that were brought up that I'd be looking for a consensus on before we make an actual change within the budget document. And I think that it may actually go beyond the budget document if we have anything related to our own internal policies. The first item was with regards to page 4, city clerk's performance measures. Actually, let me go back even further. The first was with regards to city manager's performance measures. I guess I'd ask a consensus of council. Is this something you want brought back to discuss from a perspective of a total overhaul to turn it into part of an annual performance evaluation?
I would, just so we have alignment with everything in the city. And I know we're trying to do that with the vision plan and strategic plan and help with the resources and such, but by having that one general, these are the tick marks for measuring your performance, it also helps with our evaluation of you on the annual basis. It gives it more substance.
And I'm not sure if we'd be able to actually do that exercise and get it into the budget in time for final budget production and adoption, which I think is one of the issues, but I'm not sure I'm seeing a consensus of council members supporting that change.
I was going to say, I agree with Georgette. I mean, it says city manager's performance measures, which is what I would consider to be your performance measures. But we can maybe go backwards on it a little bit, use these for this year. And then as we get to your review, or sometime between now and your review next year, go ahead and modify these so that they're ready to go for the following budget year. And basically maybe start with your next review to adopt a fully aligned performance measure. But I do agree with Sandy, I know we're going to get to it, that we need to add a section on communications here. And I would go further than that and add a section, a bullet at least, regarding communications to the city clerk's office performance measures, or to their goals.
And I'll just weigh in and say that I agree also with the performance measures, that we do need to try to align what's in the budget with what we're going to be reviewing you on. And then of course, my suggestion regarding communications, I think that's really important. And I agree with Chris. I think it's good to add that to the city clerks also as well.
Would you also like to do the same exercise for the city attorney's office, since the city attorney is also a direct report to council as well, with regards to the exercise of creating alignment within the goals and objectives? I'm seeing heads nod on that one as well. So is it the desire of council that we leave these status quo for this year with the minor changes of the communications and schedule something for a future briefing to start talking about alignment with the budget? Seeing heads nod. Okay, good. And then the other item that was on here was extending the amount of time that you have between getting the packet and the actual meeting itself. Right now on page 4, that's listed as 4 days. And Lori, if you're on the line, I'd ask you, is that currently codified within our own internal processes, or is there anything from council that's been adopted that locks in that 4-day number?
I'm not aware of any type of internal processes, but that was something that was in the ordinance. I went ahead and pulled it up pretty quickly. I wasn't sure if anybody knew that it was in there.
So it sounds like that's an ordinance that would need to be modified.
Exactly. But you may even talk to Chris A about that.
And is it just as 4 days, or does it say 4 business days? There's a big difference.
Doesn't it read 2 days, or is it 4 days?
The budget indicates 4 days prior to meeting.
And what does the ordinance say? I just took it off my screen. Let's see.
While she looks for that, as far as the performance measures in a workshop, my suggestion is to do that after November, not to kick the can, but I think the new council would be the better people to talk about performance measures than the old, since we're losing potentially 4 people going forward and setting some new parameters. I think we're only 3 months away.
Mike, you're on mute.
Gotta have the mouse over the screen. Section 2.3. Section 2.36, submittal of agenda to members in advance. Code of ordinances. The city manager shall furnish each member of the council with the agenda items to be addressed at least 2 days prior to every meeting. That's all it says.
I'm comfortable with the current time frame.
I didn't hear that.
I just said I'm good with the current time frame, getting it 4 days prior to Monday or 2 business days.
I would have to say that I agree with Georgette. This is something that I brought up as a citizen before I was ever on the council, that it's definitely, it makes it difficult for citizens to provide valuable input or meaningful input when there's not a lot of time for them to look at what's in the agenda packet and do the research regarding the issue and then provide the input to the city council. And likewise, I do think it would be good to have some time for the council to be able to spend a little more time on the agenda packet as well.
Would it make sense to bring this item to one of the first briefings in December with the new council seated to determine how they want to operate as a council and see what the appropriate time is to have those packets in advance? They may even want the agenda memos in a different format as well. That might be a good topic of conversation for the new seated council.
I was thinking that as well, because you have the iPads we just bought. So I would think there's going to be a transition to the iPads, which I like. And under that, I think it can get done a lot quicker anyway. But I would concede that I think that's a better decision for the new council.
I'm not sure that I agree with that because I think that this has been a longstanding issue. I don't know that it's something that should depend on a new council. That's just my opinion.
And for me, this goes beyond just city council. This goes to the boards as well. And especially for the boards, when you're looking at the planning commission and the board of adjustments, when people need to really understand what it is that they're looking at. It's not as cut and dry per se as what council looks at. But yeah, I prefer to get it done sooner rather than later. And I understand the argument that we might want to wait for a new council, but what if there's 3 months worth of 4 months, however many months that is, that people are going to not have information and decisions are going to be made that they may not feel prepared to have input into.
Hey, Mike, there's two concepts involved in that. That's one is the publication of the agenda with all the materials, but then also providing or furnishing the agenda with all the materials to city council. And I was wondering, excuse me, when does the clerk publish the agenda versus when we furnish the material? Is it the same day?
Yeah, everything is done on the same day on that Thursday beforehand.
Okay.
I'm not hearing a clear consensus one way or the other. And with that being said, we're going to plan on bringing something back to council for future discussion on that ordinance that Lori referenced, section 2-36, submittal of agenda to members in advance. And we'll address it from that point going forward.
Can I just add really quick that I, as a council member, I'm not speaking from the citizen perspective. The timing is fine with me just because we're used to it. But I will say that having the digital agenda is very helpful, as well as the briefings. We've almost always seen the trickier issues. We've almost always seen or heard them already once before. So as far as the council members are going, I feel like we're very well prepared. But I think the citizen access to the material is certainly something to consider. But I'm quite comfortable with the amount of time as we're currently doing it.
Okay.
I tend to agree. I'm comfortable with the current time. I think if the succeeding council wants to make a change, that's great. Let them make a change. In the current scenarios, if we don't get enough information, we also have the ability to suggest to council that an item be tabled while we get more additional information. So I don't know that, I hate to see this budget process be turned into a let's just revisit everything right now. I mean, I want to stay focused on let's get the budget through and give everybody an opportunity. We've had 8 years or a couple of years to make an effect change. It's going to be somebody else's turn in 105 days. And I think we ought to give them that opportunity to make those changes. That's my opinion.
Not that you're counting, right?
No, I'm not counting, no.
Any other comments or questions on executive and legislative department? Hearing none, we will go on to the second budget, which is the finance department. And I will turn it over to CFO Ashley Gossett.
Hello. So I will walk you all through the finance budget. There's not much different this year. Mike has already covered the organizational change. Our mission in finance continues to be to provide financial stewardess and property management services with an emphasis on accountability, transparency, and customer service. We continue to have 4 divisions where in the past it was the information services. We now have business analysis. So the information systems moved over to administration, but the business analysis and ERP functions remain with finance. So on page 1, it lists kind of the summary for each of the divisions, and later in the business plan, it'll break out the specific positions in each division. On page 2 of the plan, you can see the financial summary for finance. Overall, the budget is up less than 3%. You'll see the kind of greatest changes in the pay personal services, which is a combination of the pay plan and then the addition of the second accounting technician position that you all approved back in January. The finance department is funded largely by internal service charges. We have a small portion of it, which is funded by our lease facilities and the general fund, which is the building maintenance group. On page 3 of the plan, I'll just touch on some of the objectives. One thing that, our primary responsibility is to maintain the citywide financial records in accordance with generally accepted governmental accounting standards, and to provide credible and reliable financial reports to both our internal and external users. And you can see on page 3 the detailed itemization of the positions. As a result of the pay plan earlier this year, they reclassified 2 utility billing positions. We did not add 2 people, they just changed their titles. So you can see the counts the same from 19 to 20. The plan added 2 senior account specialists. And then if we move over to page 4, this focuses on the accounting, utility billing, and business analysis divisions. Just to touch on a couple of our recent accomplishments, we continue to receive both the Government Finance Officers Awards for Excellence in Financial Reporting and in Budget Preparation. It was our 27th year for our CAFR and our 26th year for our budget. We continue to offer a free e-check program to our customers, and last year we had 92,500 payments come through our e-check program. So for our goals for 2021, our primary goal is always to maintain adequate cash reserves to fund emergencies and capital purchases in order to minimize the issuance of new debt. As item 5, I want to mention that we've already started working toward this with the engagement of an independent consultant for the ERP assessment. We'll be working on that through the end of this fiscal year and into the beginning of next year. And as always, we continue to investigate how to bring in a credit card program. It's deeply tied to how we roll out our ERP program. So once we determine which way we're going to go with that, we'll figure out which is the best credit card processing option for us. So if you look to page 5 for the performance measures in accounting and utility billing, one thing I want to touch on, and I'm very proud of the city, I'm very proud of the utility billing department. Our average answer time for a phone call is 4.6 seconds. That means within 4.6 seconds of calling the city, you will speak to a human being. So customer service is always our priority, and we feel like that's the way we can shine and maintain that relationship with our customers. As the budget issues, paramount is our ERP conversion project. This has been a budget issue for the past several years, and it will probably be there for the next several years as we've kind of finalized this major generational technology shift for us. And if we shift over to page 6, this is our property management division, and it includes our purchasing group. So we have 9 employees in total. Their budget is up overall 3.5%. You'll see a $100,000 or 6.3% increase in operating costs in the property management division. And that's driven by 2 major things. Our property management includes our lease facilities, which pays a portion of all of our software maintenance agreement. And so we have the year-over-year increases in the software licenses like Microsoft and Adobe and the GIS licensing. And that's a $30,000 change from year to year. Additionally, we programmed $55,000 in for 2021 to cover the enhanced cleaning at our city facilities as a result of COVID-19. We had brought them in periodically, and we're thinking into next year, we want to have funds available as needed or on a rotating basis in those facilities. So the major accomplishments for the property division, I'll just touch on two of them. One of them is in the O&M facility. We replaced our above ground storage tanks, but this was the first time we've had to do this since that facility was built. It was a major undertaking, and I have to give kudos to our property manager, Luis Flores, for keeping that project on time and on budget. He had to do a lot of logistics to rearrange the fuels for our fleet to go to the gate gas station for the 8 weeks that our pumps were down. So that we're very proud of how that program worked. Additionally, after a couple of years of discussions, we entered into a lease agreement with the Navy for space on our communication cell tower, or actually for our O&M radio tower, and that will provide additional dollars to our leased facilities fund. On page 7, it lists the property management goals and performance measures. The primary goal here is to keep the city facilities looking good and in good condition at all times to have a positive impression for our citizens. And on the last page, page 8, the performance measures for the building maintenance and lease facilities. I just wanted to call to your attention on the leased properties. Our telecommunications tower is now coming up on 20 years old. So the original lease agreements we had with the cell phone carriers are expiring and need to be renewed because they were 5-year leases with 3 renewals. So we'll be renegotiating all of those within the next year. Are there any questions about the finance department?
Hearing none. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
With that being said, we'll kick over to the third department of the evening, Human Resources. We have our HR Director, Ann Muse, on the line, and we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. The Human Resources Department is a relatively small department. We only have 6 staff members, and our budget this year is consistent with last year. The majority of differences you'll see in our budget are really related to our risk management and our insurance, our property liability insurance, and our health insurance. So I'm going to go through the budget fairly quickly and spend some time talking about our insurance coverages. On page 1 is the mission statement of the Human Resource Department is making the city a great place to work. I wanted to talk about one of the objectives, which is recruiting and hiring outstanding employees. Interestingly enough, prior to COVID-19, we were in a very tight labor market, and it was difficult to recruit staff for a lot of positions. I just wanted to make the comment that since we've advertised for positions after COVID, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of our applicants as well as the qualifications of our applicants. So despite a terrible experience with COVID, we are seeing some benefit in our recruitment area. On page 2, if we go to page 2, we have listed our recent accomplishments in the Human Resource Department. I want to talk a little bit about our insurance coverages. Last year, we did an RFP for our property and liability insurance, and we were able to reduce our insurance expense by approximately $200,000. This year, if the council recalls, in June, you approved an RFP that we did on our health insurance. We were able to maintain the same coverage we had on all our insurance for health with the Florida Blue, and we had a 7.5% reduction. So that's significant benefit to the city that's going to go to the city's bottom line. If we go down under the goals for 2021 on page 2, one of the goals is the implementation of the Munis payroll system and the city's ERP system. As Ashley mentioned, we are going through a process where we're evaluating where we are in that process. So that may change depending on the recommendations that we get from our consultant. On page 3, in the Human Resource Department, we have our performance measures down there. They're fairly consistent with last year, as you can see. There is one area that I want to highlight that is an area of concern, is under our workers' comp self-insurance experience modification rate. Last year, when we RFP'd for insurance coverage, we were able to get out of the self-insurance business for our workers' comp. That was very beneficial to us because we have seen a steady increase in our experience modification. We have insurance with the League of Cities for workers' comp, but we still have some cases that are left over from our self-insured situation, and those don't go away. So we have some cases that will continue to require self-insurance administration as well as expenses, but hopefully over time we can wheedle them down. We're down to about 6 now, but 3 of them are fairly large. We have excess insurance coverage for our workers' comp claims that go over $150,000, and that is covered by the League of Cities. And 3 of those claims are already at that position. So other than that, I really don't have any other comments to make about page 3. So we can move on to page 4. On page 4 is a summary of the expenditures associated with Human Resource Department. As I indicated, they are flat in comparison to last year. There is a transfer in our budget, which is, Ashley, correct me, is for money we're putting aside to eventually replace time clocks. Is that correct, Ashley?
That's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And if you move down on the page 4, you can see that we do have significant savings in our insurance and risk management, as I discussed, based on our property liability insurance and our city health insurance. On page 5 is just another summary of that. So at this point, I'm going to kind of move through the following pages that talk a lot about our insurance. I have covered that. If anybody has any questions on that, I probably would like to move on to page 7 if possible. Any questions on any of those pages? Okay, so if we get to page 7, at the bottom of the page, we have fund balances. And we have 2 fund balances. One is for workers' comp, and you can see that in the red there on that page. That was money that we accumulated when we were self-insured for workers' comp. We have over $1 million in that fund. And as I said before, we moved away from that self-insurance model, and potentially that's money that could be available for other purposes. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We also have $1.2 million in there in our property liability insurance fund balance. That money is used to pay premiums. Because we've had a reduction in the cost of our property and liability, that has money as well that could potentially be utilized out of that fund balance. So just want to bring that to your attention. Okay, on page 8, we get into a discussion about the pension plans. The pension board approved the budgets for next year. Our pension budget is basically flat from this year to next year. We are seeing an increase in the employee contributions to the pension plans. That increase is approximately 5% or $177,000. And that's mainly due to the decision the pension boards have made to decrease the assumed rate of return, expected rate of return for the pension plans from 8% down to 7.5%. And as we make that reduction gradually each year, it does result in an increase in the city's contributions to the plans. We also closed the fire pension plan since we outsourced fire to City of Jacksonville. Because of that, the part of the interlocal agreement was to assume a 7% assumed rate of return. It did result in an increase in the contributions to the fire plan, as well as a reduction in the percent funded in the fire plan. Those are basically the highlights of my budget. As I said, we have a fairly small budget and a small department. And the majority of changes that we see in the budget are really related to risk management and the success we had in doing an RFP for both property and liability insurance and for our health insurance. So that's all I have if anybody has any questions.
No questions? Okay. Thank you, Ann. Well, that covers the 3 departments that we were hoping to get through this evening. If council doesn't have any more thoughts or comments on these first 3 departments, we can go ahead and end this meeting, and in preparation for the 6 o'clock council briefing that will start up under a separate Zoom invitation. Any final thoughts or comments? All right, thank you all. We'll see you at 6 o'clock. Have a good night.